it would be great to get started by just sharing a little bit about who you are, what your role is, how long you've been in it. I know that you still have over half a year remaining in your role, but I do feel quite lucky to be someone who's getting the first farewell Keith Kruger conversation on the record to just hear a little bit.
The farewell tour has begun. So I'm Keith Kruger, CEO of CoSN, and I've had the honor of running CoSN for the last 32 years, plus or minus, depending on when we want to count it. And CoSN, my background, the interesting thing from a background perspective is I'm neither really a teacher nor a technician. I was brought in from the policy world to start thinking about how do we use technology in education. And I was there at the dawn of the public internet. It just happened it was as technology from the defense world was moving into the commercial world. And a few of us were interested in what does that mean for education, libraries, and healthcare.
I want to touch on almost everything you just shared, including the techlash taking place, current policy that's consequential to EdTech and schools, the role of vendors today, that of district leaders. We'll touch on it all. But to get started, you've seen a lot of the next big things that come and go in education technology. Obviously in education, especially as a former teacher, we know that there's always new acronyms, new protocols, new literacy frameworks, all that jazz all the time. But I think that there's been a lot of changes in EdTech. At this point, what makes you believe a technology is actually going to matter? I am just interested in learning about how your own thinking has evolved in that way.
Yeah, I think as I look back, the world's biggest IT consulting firm, Gartner, talks about the hype cycle. And initially, when something new comes along, a lot of people get very excited and we reach this peak. And then all of a sudden, it becomes a big valley where people say it didn't do any of the things that it promised. And what we really want to look at is the long tail, which is about the time that we don't pay any attention to it. It's changed everything we do. And think about the internet, think about email, think about mobile devices. I'll also say there's a difference between one more technology which addresses a piece of what we do and something that I would say is transformative and really a revolution. And those only happen every so often. According to the experts, there have been 4 industrial revolutions. The first one 200 years ago was steam, changed with railroads and ships, the way things moved and people moved. The second one was sort of electricity 150 years ago as we started to change the industrial revolution of factories and things like that. And in the last 30, 40 years, we've really had one around the internet. So the interesting thing that the experts have been saying for the last 4 or 5 years is we're in an AI revolution. And let me be very clear, the old revolutions don't go away. We still use electricity, we still use the internet, but AI is as powerful and transformative as that. And so the question for K-12 is both how do we use it in the way we do teaching and learning, and how does it prepare students for a future? Because clearly the future economy will have that as the centerpiece. So how do we make sure that students, when they come out of the system, are ready for that workforce preparedness?
As a former teacher, as a former student, as someone working in EdTech, and in my reporting, I've just heard so much about how AI feels fundamentally different, as you've mentioned, from all the tech that came before it. But I do think in my reporting, I've also sensed that the shift has been akin to the advent of the internet or the advent of one-to-one devices, or the concept rather of one-to-one devices. Do you see AI as fundamentally different in that way?
I do. And I think we're right now in the Gartner hype cycle reaching a valley. We've been in a hype, and clearly the corporate world and clearly the stock market has been at a hype cycle around AI. And there's a understandable concern that maybe we're moving too fast. This The interesting thing also, when you take the long view, is took over 100 years. Electricity took 100 years. The internet took 40 years. They're saying that the AI revolution will be seen over a much shorter time. I don't want to predict exactly what it is because predictions are always wrong, but half of what it was for the internet. And we've seen that in terms of adoption. And you see that in surveys of students and teachers of how much they're already using those tools. Now, whether they're doing it in a safe and effective way, or whether it's really making a difference for teaching and learning, is it making a difference in the productivity? Is it making a difference in the way the operations of the school system happen? Those are all big questions. I'll take the liberty of answering one more long-term view, and that is, although we are an Education Technology Association, we've learned that the biggest challenge is not the technology. The biggest challenge is people. I have white hair, a little more than anyone else probably listening, but was an old cartoon called Pogo, and Pogo would say, "I've seen the enemy and it is me." And that has been our mantra for the last 30 years. The biggest difference isn't the technology, it's the people, it's the teachers and administrators who are going to figure out how it makes a difference. And if it doesn't make a difference, then we shouldn't do it. Technology doesn't have, we don't have to use AI or the internet on every aspect of teaching and learning. And in fact, I think some of this tech backlash is coming because the assumption is that's all we're doing. And it's important to get out on the playground, and it's important to have Play-Doh or games. It's important to connect and talk to others. In fact, even more important, perhaps, than the technology. So what we want to do is not technology replacing teachers. We want technology like AI to improve the way that we do learning and teaching.
I think what's really interesting is you made a point to say the fundamental difference from your perspective is that the rate of AI transformation is so much faster than other technologies.
Yes. We haven't seen anything yet. Yeah.
And I think that connected with the other point you made, or one of the many other points you just made, is about the biggest problem is people. And oftentimes when things are changing too fast, people have a hard time keeping up or feeling safe in doing so, or excited and motivated to. So I think that there is such a strong connection between those two points you made, for sure.
Yeah, and there always is a significant backlash by people. In the Industrial Revolution that we think about with factories and whatever, there were huge pushback, strikes, and people didn't want to move to cities. Some people didn't want to. And so this is not a new thing. We're in a great moment of uncertainty and chaos, and that has political implications, and that comes back from my background. So expect a bumpy ride, as they say.
You briefly mentioned the techlash, and of course, it wouldn't be a full Farewell Kruger interview without addressing such a thing. We're, of course, seeing some real pushback against technology in schools right now, with concerns about screen time, distractions, mental health, cell phones, if technology ultimately hinders or helps learning, all of it. How much of that criticism, from your standpoint, is fair?
I think the concern, the anxiety, particularly that parents and teachers and policymakers have, are legitimate. They're real. They see anxiety and depression and things like that, and the evidence is there for students. I think some of the remedy is misplaced and started with really during the pandemic, but also just today, watching kids outside of school with cell phones, with social media. Those are distraction and are designed to keep the child distracted and engaged, and that is a problem. And so we saw a really rapid policy shift where over 40 states now have adopted, and I suspect it'll be almost 50 by the time next year's state legislative sessions happen. But that over the last 8 months, especially over the rollout since the beginning of this year, has shifted to a different conversation. And you use the term screen time. And we think there's a fundamental difference between the personal devices and things like cell phones and social media and gaming that are outside of personal time, and well-designed education technology, which hopefully is designed with pedagogy behind it, with a real instructional focus. We also think there have been some rush to simplistic solutions that are by minutes or really what we would call the quantity. We think that's a misframe of how we really need to think about it. The more powerful and better way to think about it is around quality, not quantity. And by quality, we mean, does it make a difference? It doesn't really make a difference if a child is 30 minutes or 60 minutes in front of a screen, if it's bad, if it's not useful for their learning, if a distractive game. But if it's a long time and it gets them engaged in a powerful new way, then it's great. And I think we always have to realize that there are students that have special needs who the only way they may learn is in front of a screen. So why would we create one-size-fits-all students? This instructionally should come down to teachers and to local school systems to figure out what they're trying to do. And I think we've just put out a CoSN screen time guidance. To be very honest, we've been very good at telling people what they shouldn't do. And we wanted to flip that and tell them, how do you shape a thoughtful screen time imbalance approach? And it's up on our website. There's a free executive summary, or member only is a much more detailed document. But it's a big fundamental shift, I think, in where we've been. Again, I've been at it for a long time, and I think when we started CoSN, when I started running the organization, we were trying to get people's attention to say there's an opportunity here. And most parents and most policymakers for the last 30 years up to this moment have saw that was beneficial. And we've had a long-term strategy in the United States to get schools connected to the internet. This is a different moment where parents and policymakers are saying, but we don't want them in front of a screen. And I think what they mean is we don't want them in front of screens that are not contributing to their education.
Yes.
And that's a reasonable concern.
I just wanted to comment that I have interviewed and I sat in on his panel at, which conference was this now? The one in Chicago, CoSN, of course, duh.
Yes.
I've been to too many conferences this year. It was wonderful. I love Chicago. But I met with Cooper Sped. I sat in on his panel, but I also had a one-on-one interview with him as well. And I thought it was terrific, especially with his current classroom experience about a high-functioning classroom, intentional tech use looks nothing like passive scrolling that you see on social media, but instead he defined it with the 3 pillars of being responsive, supplementary, or a tool for differentiation, which I thought was fantastic and something that seems so simple, but just those clear categories, really siloing effective tech use is so useful and helpful for teachers or even parents to look at.
Yeah. And we do sometimes have a problem where technology is used as a reward for, you get to play this game if you finish your work. And that's we need to say clearly to teachers, that's not a good use of the school provided device with the technology we have. It either should advance the learning, but it shouldn't be a game.
Thank you for that. And I want to shift ever so slightly to be respectful of your time towards leadership, not necessarily from an education agency, but district leadership, and how much it's changed dramatically over your career, but honestly within just the past 10 years as well. What, in your view, does strong district leadership in this space, meaning ed tech, require today that it didn't maybe 20 or 30 years ago, or even 5 years ago?
Yeah. I think as a professional association, we realized that a lot of people coming into leadership roles around technology had different backgrounds. They had teaching background, they were an early adopter, or they had a technical background, or they had a business or military background that gave them understanding of data or processes. But in reality, if we're really going to powerfully use technology, we need to have skill sets that stretch us. We think there are three fundamental buckets around essential skills. One is you need to understand the technology, of course. But secondly, you need to understand education and how teachers use the technology and what a difference it would make in that. And then third, if you want it from a strategic perspective, because we are talking about the school system, because the school district, not just a classroom. So then you need leadership and policy understanding to really be valuable to the superintendent and the cabinet. And so I'm very proud. I like to say that CoSN was an association before a career path, but we realized that when we started, there might have been 4 people in the United States that had the title of Chief Technology Officer.
It's wild.
But we started using that generic term, and now, in fact, most people in those positions do have that title. Titles vary, but the responsibility is this is a strategic asset. I think it's very similar to finance. School districts had bookkeepers and accountants 40, 50 years ago. They still have bookkeepers and accountants, but they have a chief financial officer because money is a strategic asset. And we believe technology is as fundamental as money. It's a way of innovating and changing the operations and the way in which we do teaching and learning. And if so, then there needs to be that at a cabinet level perspective. And so I'm very proud of the fact we created that framework, and we created the first in the world ISO certified certification for chief technology officers called the CETL. So that was a big breakthrough in terms of that. And the last thing I'll say is, while we are I think one thing that CoSN has gotten right is building a community. And the power of a professional association is people who have the similar sort of responsibilities coming together and saying, what's your problem? What are you trying to fix? What are you dealing with, whether it's cybersecurity or privacy of data or AI? And then saying, what resources do you need? And it isn't product specific, but strategy, vendor neutral advice. And then we say, who wants to help us build that? So the customer builds the resource, and then, of course, they use it. So that's why the stuff we've created is so valuable, because we're very close to who the customer is, because the customer built it. And it isn't that we are the largest association. We're actually quite small in terms of staffing, but we have really engaged people who do powerful work, and everybody learns from each other.
What is the dynamic or role then of vendors in that equation? How much responsibility do vendors have for proving that what they're selling actually works?
That's a great question, and it's something that fundamentally, and I came in when CoSN had 2 years before me, and they had already had a long fight and resolved it, that you couldn't have a thoughtful, strategic conversation about technology if the companies were out in the vendor hall and never part of the conversation. And so we have invited the corporate sector to be at the table and help co-create resources. That means a different kind of behavior on the part of the private sector that have to take off their sales and marketing hat and put on their strategic partner hat to say everybody should be doing these things on, say, cybersecurity. And we all ought to agree that that should get done. And then you can also look for companies, they've loved being part of it. For one thing, they're not telling you what the problems are, but rather in a conversation about what needs to be created. And secondly, you can start a conversation with the school district, say, this isn't X company saying this, this is CoSN, your professional association that says everybody should do these things, and here's how we solve them, and here's how we go even beyond that.
Moving on to the higher sphere of this entire EdTech dynamic, the policy level. I feel it's impossible to have a farewell tour or farewell interview with you, let alone a staff member from CoSN, without discussing the present state of E-rate. It is one of the clearest through lines of your career that I was able to identify. CoSN advocated for E-rate from its inception, and now 3 decades later, its future is again part of a major policy debate. What does that tell you or tell us about the relationship between tech, educational opportunity, public policy? And this is a loaded question, but do you worry anything could be lost if policymakers begin treating connectivity as a problem that America has already solved?
I think that's a great question, and one that gets to the heart of it. I'm very alarmed that the FCC, which is the telecommunications agency of the federal government, would even be raising some of the questions like, should we just put up a flag and say mission accomplished? That's crazy. We all know that when we're talking about connectivity, it isn't just having a pipe into our home, but every month we have to pay the bill. And school districts, the way that they've become, the way they've gotten broadband, the way they've gotten Wi-Fi, is because of the E-rate success. And it's been bipartisan. It's been part of the Universal Service Fund, and universal is a key word. We don't want to limit this just to one part of the country, say rural. This needs to be all schools based on poverty, making sure that everyone can afford to be connected. So that has me very worried. We're going to have to mobilize. Now, all of that said, I believe we can win. We should not sit back and say, this is a done deal. The E-rate program has had bipartisan support from all, because it benefits every school in the country, every classroom, every student. And so we need to be loud and noisy, but we can win this fight.
And when you say we can win this fight, what exactly is the misunderstanding then? I
think the misunderstanding goes back to what we already talked a lot about today, which was, if you look at the headline of this E-rate notice of public comment, it's labeled as a way to address screen time. I think that's placed. They're taking the anxiety around what's happening with distractions and things like that, and assuming that you can just pull the plug. And what they don't understand, that everything that the school district does actually runs on the network. Everything from bus schedules, everything to payroll, the security cameras, the doors, the locks, everything runs on the network, including the student information, including the learning management system, the content that school districts have been investing in for years and years. We can't go back to the books, nor should we. Nor should we just limit it to the computer lab down the hall like you hear some advocates argue for. It's a new world, and we've already talked about this industrial revolution with AI. We need to prepare kids to do it in a responsible, ethical way. If they don't learn it at school, where are they going to learn it?
Yeah. What's so interesting is, given the types of things that E-rate funds, you mentioned the networks, locks, all of those things, it is quite interesting that E-rate has been absorbed into the tech lash kind of debate, or the screen lash debate more specifically, because it's not always supporting the purchase of screens. So I do think that's really an interesting oversight.
And I have to, being a long advocate for E-rate, I have to encourage everyone to go to saveourerate.com, and that connects to, we're working in partnership with the library world, all of the other education groups, and you'll see that there's really handy little tools. You can see how much E-rate has benefited your school district or your library. And then there's a simple tool that literally takes 30 seconds. You put in your zip code and it pre-populates a message, which we hope you'll customize and say, tell a story about how Mrs. Jones's kindergarten class made a difference with the E-rate and provide the data. So all of that's pretty handy and easy. There's also a petition we want an authorized school district to sign on to. We need thousands of them to go to Congress and say, you better pay attention. The FCC is trying to be the Department of Education, and they have no expertise in that.
Thank you for sharing those resources and that information. I want to be respectful of your time, and I'm just wondering if you have 5 more minutes. I have a few more questions,
Sure.
and I really appreciate it. We're wrapping up, I swear.
No problem.
It's been over 30 years in this field, which is incredibly impressive. You've seen everything. What are you feeling? Are you more optimistic or more concerned about where EdTech is headed in general, and why?
Well, it's clearly a pivot moment, and it all depends on people and being thoughtful. And people are looking for a solution. Sometimes the easy solution is also the wrong solution. And yes, I am concerned that simplistic, one-size-fits-all policies are being considered in state legislatures and in some school districts. And it's going to take all of us to reframe the conversation. And that doesn't mean diminishing the concerns that are being raised about distraction, but it does mean saying, if we really believe that, then let's focus on quality. Let's have a conversation about that. Let's make sure the teachers really are thoughtful and when they're applying these technology. But we fundamentally don't believe that all screens are bad. And we just need to articulate when it's appropriate.
Yeah. I think everybody is looking for that articulation as we speak, let's hope. Couple more questions. What are you proudest of your 30 years tenure plus at CoSN, and what has meant the most to you personally?
I think we've already talked about E-rate.
Yes.
We've talked, for inference, to the certification, which provides a credential. The third thing I would say I'm very proud of is the thought leadership kind of work that we've done. And we referenced the work we just issued on screen time policies. But to be very honest, if you poke around the CoSN website, you'll see a lot of resources, whether it's on cybersecurity or whether it's on privacy of student data or our maturity model on AI. It isn't one thing, and they keep evolving. And part of that gets back to what I'm proud about is we've created a community, and a community that not only is there to support each other, but volunteers to create really useful, practical tools for yourself and for others.
Even just as a former teacher transitioning to ed tech reporting, I've found CoSN resources extremely valuable, particularly the TLE partnership, things like that, Cooper's Fed's research, of course. So thank you for that. And final question. You still have several months left at CoSN, approximately 8 in your current role. What do you want to accomplish before you leave, if anything? And what do you hope the next leader takes on or continues?
Well, clearly the front and center focus is saving the E-rate and making sure that that policymakers don't adopt crazy or policies around screen time that are not thoughtful. And we will conclude with with our annual conference next April. I hope you can get to Orlando. So we hope to see lots of people. Yeah. So I think that's more than enough from the plate. I'm sure there'll be other things too, but
certainly. And for the next leader, what do you hope that they carry forward?
I think the great news is CoSN's in good shape. We have a strategic plan. We have engaged a really strong board, leadership, great chapters in nearly 40 states. So I hope that we build out to those last 10. And I hope that we continue. It's never about one person. It's all about us. And it's all about building the human capacity of people who lead technology.
Keith, thank you so much for your tenure. Thank you for this time with you one-on-one. It's very valuable and special to me. And just thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you so much.